what I'd like to explore with you as an Australian expat who's spent significant time overseas and now come back to Australia and during that whole time been immersed in entrepreneurial communities, what are some of the key practical differences you see in terms of the approach to failure here and what you've seen in the States?
Well, there's huge differences, like absolutely huge differences that took me a long time to get my head around when I first moved to the States. I think that there's two things Americans are told, I think, from day one. And I'm just going to make some mass generalisations here, so you'll have to forgive me. But the first thing is that you can do anything, you can be anything you want. And the second thing is that America is the greatest country on earth. And those things are repeated to them the whole way through. And that creates this culture, I think, of a real confidence around it. And people, and that then, that certain behaviours come out of that, like they're very collaborative, they're very supportive. Where, I'm not saying Australians aren't, but you come here and it's more than a small market, big market, different, like mentality. It's I think, deeply cultural, that we come back to Australia and it's, we have a very high, we're very scared of failure. I'm very scared of risk. You know, we don't like risk. And that comes through in the companies that we create. It comes through in the number of entrepreneurs we have, which we need more of. You know, it comes through in the types of companies we invest in. You know, you heard before with Larry Marshall, and he's saying that that investors here just don't take big risks. And that's, you know, that's why we're having so many companies going offshore. So I think it's a really big issue, and not one we're going to solve today probably, but good to address it.
Okay, and Randall, in terms of RedEye, I guess you know you guys have been on a bit of a journey and you've taken a risk and stepped out and started something. What prompted you to do that?
Lack of sleep would really be what was. So it's a bit of a... What happened basically is this recurring problem happened in the industries that we transversed, both resources, health systems, different places like that. And I found myself hijacked by this recurring problem that I'm thinking, I could save 30% here for everyone. And, you know, it just become I had to wake up, I had to do that every day. So it really, to migrate from being a traditional engineer, I worked in the big engineering companies, I moved around, relatively successful, but I'd missed out on that satisfaction somewhere along the way. So it was that my driving satisfaction. And that was the difference I wanted to leave the world with, you know. I wanted to fix up a problem that I'd seen.
And Brad, I guess, you know, for simPro, was it part of that for you as well in terms of setting off and starting your own thing? Was it you wanted to fix something? I mean, I guess we've heard Amanda talk about in the States, you know, it's the best country in the world and you can do anything from day one. But what motivated you? Was it a story similar to Randall's?
Yeah, I guess it's always been about trying to improve, and I think most of us want to improve something at some point. So every step of the way has been about exploring the opportunity to develop and evolve processes. And from our operational software, it's all about process. We're a process-driven business, and we help drive processes into our clients. So every step of the way, they're improving, we're improving to help them grow their business, and that's really what we want to do.
And Andrew, I guess as someone else here in the room who's been involved both in the States and here in Australia, how do you see, what's your perspective on risk and how it's approached?
Yeah, I'm going to be a bit of take a contrarian view to Amanda here, just because we like having arguments. No. So everything you say is absolutely correct. But I've got I guess, an interesting perspective that I've founded two digital businesses, had a presence of both of them here in Australia and in the US, raised money for both of them here in Australia and in the US, failed in some senses in both places, succeeded in both places. And so that gives me, I guess, a bit of a perspective on what is it we talk about when we talk about that, you know, that negative attitude that we talk about, Australians don't like risk, But I don't buy for a second, from a cultural perspective, that we're not risk takers. I mean, you think about the number of Australian backpackers around. People just go, "Yep, I'm going around the world, whatever. You know, she'll be right, mate. And I'll go wherever, take the risk." And you go to America, and they hear that you're doing that. They just go, "My God, that is just crazy. How can you take such risks?" So I think it's a certain type of risk. And what we encountered a lot is the discussion when it comes to entrepreneurship is often around raising money, it's risk capital. And how much institutionalised risk-taking do you get at the investment stage? And without a doubt, you know, you've all read the statistics around the amount of money in the system for risk-taking ventures in Australia, even on a per capita adjusted basis, it's just nothing. And that obviously then plays out into how much we can actually access and have the companies that rely on that. But the flip side is also true. So from an entrepreneurship perspective, so at the entrepreneurs level, we see and we encounter, from a day-to-day perspective in Australia, great companies doing great things and actually, I think, taking bigger risks because they don't have this kind of sense of a safety net that, I'm just going to be able to raise money and get out of jail. And we went through with Stitch the 500 Startups program in Mountain View. And so we were surrounded by 30 companies on that program. We're involved with a bunch of other Y Combinator companies. You get to see it. And there was a mindset with a lot of the entrepreneurs that it almost wasn't, sure, they were doing a startup and they were taking a risk, but it really, to them, didn't feel like it was much of a risk. They'd done a little bit of proof of concept, and then they got some money, and then they figured they'd be getting some Series A, and then their staff just joined them because they were on a journey to something, and they weren't taking salary cuts or anything like that. And you go, well, who's taking the bigger risks there? And I actually think Aussie entrepreneurs actually take a lot of risks. What we need to fix actually is more around the institutionalised, how we get the funding and how we actually get that to happen. But I don't like to give ourselves a bad name about risk-taking because I see it again and again. People are taking some great... And it's all... Risk-taking actually, from an entrepreneurial perspective, often comes down to learning. I've got to take a risk so I can learn something, and can I learn really quickly? And Aussies do that really well because they do it without spending much money. Whereas you can see a lot of US early-stage companies raise more money at a much higher valuation and burn through it like crazy because they're not being smart about how they risk. So I just think there's two sides to the story, and I don't have a solution for all of it, but I do want to recognise the risk taking that we do actually see here all over the place.
And Brad and Randall, does that resonate with you in terms of your journeys? Do you feel, in some senses, more exposed for taking risk being here in Australia and trying to build a company?
If that means mortgaging a house and not being able to make payroll, yeah, absolutely.
There you go. That's what I mean.
What are the risks you take in this country? I literally haven't been home much for the last 4 years. While you're building a company, you're travelling around the world. I think getting that institutionalised money is difficult. I also think one of the risks we've created almost, or we haven't dealt with yet, is that we don't have an ecosystem to support the entrepreneurial community. And we as a company, Wayne and I, we did the silly things. Went and knocked on the door of Sequoia, one of the biggest VCs in the world, and said, hey, we're here. Well, how silly was that, in hindsight? But that's the level of risk we take, and look, we're playing to win. There is no fallback. There's no second chances for us at this point. Yep. We've got to make it a success. So.
Yeah, I see risk in Australia as well as slightly different, and I agree with what you're saying, Andrew, that we are risk takers by nature as a race. But I also think that we are very risk adverse at the same time. So it's a conundrum. But I think part of that stems from the small market that we're in. So we are in a small market of 20 odd million people. If you stick your head up too far, too fast, you might make a mistake. That's what you're concerned about, because in the sector that you're in, if you make a mistake, what's it going to do to your reputation? What's it going to do to your career prospects? So quite often, when you're talking about the VCs or the institutional money, it is there a risk that I'm going to destroy my career by going into a risky engagement such as backing a startup fund? So I think it really boils down to the size of the market as well. Where in the US, yes, you're much more pigeonholed in what you do. However, if you make a big mistake, you can just up stumps, go to another state, start all over again. The risk is much more minimised.
But also too, it's like the way that failure is perceived, don't you think? Like if in the States, if you speak to an investor, they would say they'd prefer a company, obviously, they're talking to a founder, they'd prefer a founder that's had some success, but then the second category might be ones that have failed, and the third for them would be they probably would invest in someone who hadn't done it before, right? But I'd say in Australia, it would be number one, companies that had success. Number two would be I'd invest in someone who hasn't done it before rather than someone that's failed. And I think that's a really big difference and part of it too.
Yeah, can I jump in on that? Because we experienced that firsthand. Our first business was... Tapestry was focused on a product for senior adults, and the next business actually had the same sector, different product, slightly different demographics and everything like that, but we learned a lot. And when we raised money in the US, it was the key conversation with investors was, what did you learn from that? What did you learn? Tell me the insights that you got out of doing that. And it was quite a nuanced conversation. It was really a smart conversation. We really enjoyed those conversations. We had some of those conversations here, but more often it was, so how well did you do? So it was and the most extreme was we were actually down the track of getting a government grant through the accelerated commercialisation process, and the fact that we hadn't been as successful as we'd wanted to be with the first business actually was the killer for the grant. And you go, for an organisation that's trying to promote that risk-taking behaviour, that blew my mind. So absolutely agree with that from I guess a sophistication of understanding what failure means. Does failure mean failure, or does it mean you've learnt something? It's two big different things, and I think for culturally we do have that here. We don't have great stories of people who've gone, yep, there's this acceptance that you can try something, learn from it, and that failure will actually spur you onto something else. Generally in society here, it's kind of like, oh, they did that and they failed, they're a dud.
So, Amanda, it sounds like in part we almost ask too much of our entrepreneurs in saying, we want you to take big risks. We want it to be really risky. I mean, I'm hearing mortgages, houses on the line, versus a perspective from the States that suggests there's a view that, look, it's okay, we can fail, get it wrong, and people will let us come back and try again. Whereas here, if I try and I'm not successful, it's kind of game over in one perspective. When you hear that, I guess, and you've seen what's been happening in the States, what sort of things do you think we need to look at and examine in our cultural psyche to address that?
Bankruptcy laws would help. It does. We punish people for failing. So I think that's a big issue. And I think it's not just about the laws. It's really what it says. You fail, we'll punish you. We won't let you go into business. I think that's unbelievable. I think we need to develop the entrepreneurial culture here a lot more. You and I were talking before about this, and James was saying, I won't go into the too details of it, but he was just saying that, once a while back, his boss said to him, you need to make a decision about your career, and do you work for a big company or a small company? He didn't say, well, the third option would be, or you could create a company. And I think there's, in schools, I still don't think being an entrepreneur is seen like it is in the States. In the States, you're a rock star. That's I think everyone's so excited about it. I mean, I felt excited seeing Mike Cannon-Brookes in the room. I was like, whoa. But, so I think we need to do that. And I think whereas schools is one of the big areas that it needs to come from. And I think also we need to really sort of put these success stories up as idols, and more of them, not just Atlassian or not just Canva. There's so many people. Andrew, all the stuff you've done, why don't more people know about that? And I think we need to get out there and start really profiling it. That's one of the things we do through Elevate is we have put together this fabulous team of advisors that help the participants on the program. And I'm so lucky because you get to meet all these Australians overseas who are doing the most incredible things, and these guys, the participants, get to tap into that. But where are those stories being told back here? That's what I think. I think there's a real opportunity to do that, more of that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point when you talk about Mike Cannon-Brookes and feeling that junior that is, although senior is also very exciting when you see him in a room. But when you get that sense of inspiration, where do you guys look, Andrew? Where do you look for your inspiration? I mean, as someone looking to build a business, were there people in Australia you looked to, or was it all offshore? And
that's a tough question. Personally, I sometimes think I do what I do because I've got some kind of psychotic disorder, and I'm just, it's more this. I just can't stop myself from trying to hunt for something that's. Even I worked for a big company for a long time, and I was lucky enough to have and part of the organisation where we had that freedom. But once we got successful enough, we lost that freedom, and I was the most miserable I've ever been in my working life. So it's less about, for me personally, it's less about trying to emulate someone. It's more about I know I want to achieve something, but then once you know what it is you want to achieve, then you go looking for the people who can help guide you on that. And I think opening those doors, that ability for... I do a lot of mentoring with startups through Fishburners, StartMate, and a few other programs. But it's hard. It's hard to scale that sort of thing because there's a lot of need to help. I would love to be able to prevent some, even if it was one, but hopefully lots of people not making the same mistakes I made because we got lucky. We actually got through it. We didn't actually fail. We sold the business and we went to the next thing. But we were that close to pulling the pin on the whole thing, and I would have been back in corporate land explaining to my wife why I could now pay for the mortgage, or something like that. Thankfully, we're not having that conversation yet. But I think, those learning from other people's mistakes is actually really, really important. And I think, I actually don't think we do a bad job given the level of evolution of the ecosystem here. I mean, it's relatively new, and actually there's a lot of people doing a lot of really great stuff. I mean, Amanda's been super helpful for so many companies, and there's others doing the same thing. But I think it has to take its time to grow.
Yeah.
And Randall, in terms of the RedEye journey, where did you guys look? Where did you go to try and help map out your course in building the business?
We started locally, so we connected up with the local community, and probably one of the key things we did when we were really little was we went out and built a board. So we went and found a board. So what we challenged ourselves when we were building a board was to think bigger. So we went and met a whole bunch of guys, and over the course of the questioning, is that guy big enough? Has he done it before? Has he seen this before? So that really boiled it down. So we ended up getting a really cracker board together, and those guys, particularly in our case, for minimum financial investment, really guided us through a path of, okay, this is what you need to do next, guys. Be ready for this, be ready for that. And that was really good. It can be contrarian as well. I really like the American VC community. Guys like Mark Andreessen, I hold up really high. He promotes stuff. You go in and see, well, not that I've ever met the guy, but you go and see one of his lead guys, and they're helpful, and they tell you if you're on the right track, if you maybe should go home and think about that. Or, as I could quote, you boys could carve out a nice lifestyle business back there in Australia. So, they're quite motivating. So I think the American VC community has that stranglehold on that, but I also think they're very giving in it. It's not a secret. They're trying to scale it. They want to support. They want everyone to be a success, really. And typically, I think what we forget to do is say, hey, we've got a startup. We're 4 years old. We've raised our Series A capital. That's a success. And sometimes we forget to say that in this country. I'd be a rock star in America.
Yeah.
You would.
Normal guy.
And maybe that's something that doesn't get talked about enough. Because we definitely, from a cultural perspective, don't like blowing our own trumpet.
Yeah.
That's frowned upon.
Yeah.
And that actually has a feedback loop. You find out that these people have done amazing things and you never heard about it.
Yeah.
Greg Norman was a classic example this morning. How you could sit there as an Aussie say, you're a little bit arrogant, mate.
Yeah.
But he's just saying it how it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got 6 golf courses on the go. Well, that's awesome. He should be celebrated.
Yeah.
But it is something we need to address, I think, too, because we'll need to work on, because America's such a selling culture, and that's another thing I had to get really used to when I was there. They're good at selling, but they're really good at selling themselves.
Yeah.
They're so good. I remember when I had to interview, we were setting up a team over there, and I was interviewing people, and I come out of these interviews, I'd feel so depressed by the end of the day, because I'm like, how are all these 21-year-olds better than me? But they just sell and sell. And I think where it comes to, when you apply that to entrepreneurs, is, when you're going through pitching and trying to get people to really communicate in a really enthusiastic way what they're doing, and Australians just sort of stand there and look at the floor, and it's really hard, especially when you're teaching really early stage startups. And that's something we need to learn, definitely, to speak up. It is like Greg Norman said. It's funny you said that, because he's saying, I was the best golfer in the world, or I've got this or that, and I was like, whoa, you're really American now. But we need to I think that we need to improve that.
And Brad, I was going to ask you around the inspiration side, but maybe just with that segue from Amanda, just in terms of that pitching and selling yourself and your experiences through Elevate 61 and the journey you just went through, if you'd like to share some of that.
Yeah, sure. The pitching part of the Elevate program was fantastic. So again, thanks to KPMG in advance, learned a hell of a lot. The pitching process was very different. We're a business, we've been going for 10 years, we've never raised capital, we've got no debt, so we're quite different to a lot of the startup businesses. And so Amanda forced me to do a pitch in front of a room full of people, and it was atrocious.
It wasn't, actually. He was quite good. He's actually really good.
No, the first one.
Oh, the first one, yeah,
better.
not that good. No.
I learned quickly. And it was the whole process of learning how to succinctly get a message across, because you've got such a narrow window of opportunity with the people you're presenting to, and how do you get all those elements of that discussion point into such a short space of time and make it compelling and blow your trumpet. And and as an Australian boy, it's hard to blow a trumpet sometimes. It's not something that I'm comfortable with, especially being an introvert. Those of you out there that are on the introvert side of the spectrum, it's always a difficult thing to do. But the process of going and sitting in front of people in America and actually having to do it was a fantastic learning experience. And I've had to use it actually because we're going down that path of looking at capital, so it's paid off.
Something I actually think that Elevate 61 could really help with is not just a direct introduction, but an introduction that actually pitches. So I guess was uncomfortable when someone said, meet these guys, meet Randall and Wayne, hey, they're the next Dropbox of the engineering world. It's like, whoa! But if you don't have a statement like that impacts the world, then people don't listen, and that's how you get the money now. So.
Yeah.
And actually on that, Randall, there was a really interesting discussion that Wayne gave in Brisbane on a roundtable we had, where he was talking about early discussions around how big you guys thought RedEye could be, and discussions around, was it a $50 million company, a $100 million company, or a $1 billion company, and how that changed his thinking. I guess it'd just be interesting to hear your reflection around that, how you went about thinking about that, because it certainly changes your view as to the scale of what you're doing.
So you get that on the CTO, so I have to deliver the promises, yeah? So that was a great process to go through, but actually what it did in our business was changed us from being, hey, this is an Australian-based lifestyle business. When everyone started talking about being the first $1 billion startup out of Brisbane, it actually, it's not about our business anymore. It's about the value we're going to bring to the community around us, and bringing as many people along the journey as possible, because they're the people you need in the future to do the next great thing. So that whole framing around calling yourself the next $1 billion business, it changes. And look, it's good to talk about it. If you can talk about it, if you can write it down, if you can plan for it, you can do it.
But it also gets your head around scaling. Like, what do you need to look like to be that big? You have to scale. And I think it's another thing on that point is that what I've seen in America is that people plan to succeed, and I think here sometimes people plan to fail. Like, they're almost planning to go. You can sort of see it in their numbers and their thinking, and you're like, why you want to be 100 million? Why wouldn't you be a 500 million, more, whatever? And they think a little small, and sometimes just that pushing to get them to think bigger. Then they start suddenly thinking, well, I do have to scale. I've got to change my sales model. I've got to do whatever because I want to be that $1 billion business. That's sort of important to have those conversations, I think.
Well, I think, sorry, on that, I was going to say the $1 billion part, it's a conversation that we've had, that's our aspiration, to be a $1 billion business, and having the first time to say that in public, it was just stuck. It just wouldn't come out, and it was a really challenging thing to say. And it was, again, the exposure through the Elevate program, meeting all the entrepreneurs in the US that have gone and done it, the Australians that have trodden that path. It made it a more comfortable thing to say, but it was a very difficult thing to get out.
And why did it stick, Brad? Was it you're worried if you didn't, or if you did? What was the...
No, there's no doubt it's going to happen.
And easy, obvious, improved.
Yeah, he really got the hang of it.
I learned. It seemed like an odd thing to say for what we perceive to be a small business popping out of Brisbane as well. So there's a race on between the two of us.
As long as you don't mind coming second.
Depends on your time frame. But it really was just that very fundamental thing of, it was a difficult thing to say because it felt like a fraud in saying it almost. And I think that was the very personal part about it.
But isn't it true also, part of this is this failure conundrum, because there's only a very subtle difference between saying our goal is to become a $1 billion business versus we're the next $1 billion business. They sound like the same sort of thing, but it's very different. One is like almost like we've already made it, where it's so good and it's bragging. One is that's our aspiration, and I think it's really important to focus on aspiration. If you are stating you're kind of almost there, then you are setting yourself up for failure. I remember when this was years ago, so the ecosystem's changed a lot, but we went to raise money and I gave a pitch at Sydney Angels. And I remember one of the angels said, you should not say you're aiming to be $1 billion business. Don't do it, because no one buys that. Like there's no way that's going to happen. Everyone knows it's not going to happen, so just be realistic. Just tone it down. And that was really insightful for me to go, that, the mindset on the investors was actually, and I think that's changed a lot now that you've seen companies do it. I think it's odd we're only aiming for $1 billion businesses, but anyway,
Yeah.
But I think part of it is that embarrassment factor about kind of almost crowing about something that hasn't achieved. Because that's I don't mind singing our own praises about what we have achieved. I hate bragging about something that hasn't happened yet.
And just on that, how in terms of putting yourself out there and saying, this is what we want to achieve and my dreams are big and I've got a strong aspiration, and you've mentioned that's getting a better response now from the capital community. Is that you're finding that across Australia people are buying into those discussions a lot more now, or is it still a hard push to get people to see what you're dreaming about?
It's funny. When we raised money for Stitch, we actually raised money in the US. We had venture funds from New York, Silicon Valley, and San Francisco. And once we'd raised money there, then Australian investors came on board because they were like, "Oh, wow, you must be pretty cool." So I haven't had that example I gave from Sydney Angels. That was 4.5 years ago, I think. So I haven't actually gone out to the market here in Australia as a kind of a leading thing. It was more people would contact us and come on board with Stitch. So I don't know if I can answer it totally, but I do know anecdotally from my discussions, the guys at Blackbird, for example, these guys, if you're a VC, you have to aim for businesses that are really aiming for that scale. Just the economics don't work if you're going for looking at $50 million businesses because of the failure rates, and you really need companies that at least have the potential to go large. And I think that awareness is starting to permeate now with a growing understanding of even the angel investment community. I think one thing that we don't yet have, and Silicon Valley is made on this, is angel investors who made their money getting exits out of startups. Because, a lot of our angel investors are ex-partners at KPMG, and, so their view of risk and the value they add as investors is a very different sort than people who've been through it before and say, well, I can not only give you an opinion about your business, I can share my experiences with you. And a few exits would be very, very helpful, I think, in our community, because we've got, I think, 3 angel investors on board from the US, so again, New York and San Francisco, all of whom have done businesses that have had some parallels to what we've done before. And you go, wow, isn't that great? And that's just really hard here because we haven't had those kind of exits yet. So I'm really looking forward to a couple of big... you guys, that'd be great.
That self-perpetuation.
That's right. No, it really feeds itself. It feeds itself. And we just haven't even had that sort of cycle yet to go around once to start the next wave.
And Brad, you've mentioned you're out there now looking to raise capital for the first time. How have you found your discussions when you talk about what you want to achieve? Are people buying into that? Are you finding the investment community believing and participating?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it really depends on the model that you're taking. And I found, again, with the Elevate program and being introduced to a range of different people, the significant difference between an East Coast and a West Coast investor. And we resonate really well with an East Coast style investor. So they're after the business model and the metrics. And as we go through our business model and the metrics of our business, they're actually asking us, well, why are you aiming to be $1 billion valuation? With those metrics, we can help you become $1 billion revenue business. And so they're the kind of discussions that happen in that context. And that's pretty exciting. It's a little bit daunting, but pretty exciting process as well. But the possibilities are there.
And Randall, for you with RedEye, in terms of the discussions you're having with investors now and talking about, we're going to beat simPro and be the first Brizzy $1 billion business. How are those discussions resonating?
So we raised our capital in Australia off a traditional investor, so we were really lucky in that regard. The discussions are really quite positive, and how would I say this? There's always pressure to do more, so we have to accelerate quicker and faster, and we have to get traction in offshore markets and things like that. But I would, the support we're getting now and the people we're talking to is really quite positive. So you know, our little piece of the pie is about engineering data, and how many pieces of that are there in the world? You know, no one can really guess. So it's a big market. So if we can be successful in there, then yeah, it's great. And in terms of the success story, what happens if we are successful? I mean, it's really clear in both Wayne and I as co-founders' mind. You know, that money goes back to the people that helped us get here. You know, it goes back to the community. We're not really interested in driving Ferraris. That's not what drives us. So.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. If we can thank the panel, everybody, for what's been a fascinating discussion.